In George Washington's farewell address on September 19, 1796, he warned that, quote, "Cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion." End quote. This morning's gospel opens with the crowds following Jesus, asking for healing from their diseases. And it's become, the word has gotten out to such an extent that the crowds are just almost beyond number. Jesus has become a phenomenon. Everybody knows who he is, and everybody is there looking for something, asking for something. Jesus is bigger than the Beatles at this point, so to speak. But I'm not going to preach about that. Next, in the gospel, it mentions the Passover. It says the Passover was near, and it says all of these people, huge crowds of people, were mobbing Jesus in the Galilee, which is the northern kingdom. It's not anywhere near Jerusalem, where Jewish people are technically supposed to be at Passover. So this is a huge crowd of people that might have otherwise gone to Jerusalem, but they're in Galilee following Jesus. They have come to see this person as perhaps more important than their customs. But I'm not going to preach about that. So then the next thing is, of course, they're hungry, and Jesus is trolling Philip. Right? That's what it says in the gospel. He's asking these things to test him. He says, well, where are we going to get food to feed all these people? So Philip says, what? We can't afford food for all these, as if Jesus is stupid and it needs to be explained to him that 5,000 people, there's no caterers, there's no money. We can't do that. So Philip is saying, come on, Jesus, the program. It's impossible. I'm not going to preach about that. I might not even have a sermon this morning. We'll just see what happens. I'll just tell you all the things I'm not going to preach about. So next is Andrew, another disciple, who says, hey, there's this one boy that has 5 loaves, he has 2 fish, it's something, right? So we're in a situation where we have thousands upon thousands of people, and is it possible that only one person came prepared, and that's a little kid? Or maybe lots of people came prepared. And these are not ungenerous people. They're not selfish people. Maybe if the person right next to them didn't have anything, they would share. But they're faced with this tremendous problem. Again, thousands and thousands of people. Like, why would any one person say, I can help, when there's no chance of putting a dent in the problem? And maybe you've had this feeling before. Like, I can share. I have enough that I can, at least enough to give to one person or to 2 people. But if you watch the news, for goodness sake, the problem is just overwhelming. So we just maybe don't give it all. We just kind of hold it to ourselves because, well, what difference could I possibly make? But I'm not going to preach about that. So we know what Jesus does, of course. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And Jesus blesses God, and he has the people sit down on the hillside, and he breaks the bread, and he breaks the fish up to where 5,000, and maybe even 10,000 or more people are all fed, they're all satisfied, they're all full. They couldn't possibly eat another bite, and there's still 12 more baskets of leftovers. Is that 12 for the 12 disciples, so they get to eat? Is that 12 representing the 12 tribes of Israel? Maybe. But what we have here is this tremendous, unbelievable miracle of God hearkening back to water into wine, where it's like God cares and God is full of abundance. And there's this miracle that not only does that represent the power of God expressed through Jesus, but the love of God, the abundant, overflowing love of God. But I'm also not going to preach about that. I'm going to preach about what happens after that. I think it deserves our attention because it never gets any. After this miracle, what does it say? It says Jesus knew, he saw that the people were coming and they were going to try to take him by force and make him their king. What? You realize what just happened? What Jesus just did, he did something completely unimaginable, something that no one could have fathomed. Even his own disciples who had seen the water into wine, who had seen the healings over and over, no one expected this. This just unbelievable work of power, and then they think they're going to take him by force and make it as if they can mash a throne on his head and toss him up onto a throne against his will. What? But the gospel says it twice. First, it's the people who want to take Jesus. Then you see in the very next scene they're in a storm on the sea and they're afraid for their lives, and Jesus is walking out to them on the water, which is another great miracle I'm not going to preach about. But what does it say they want to do when they see him? Here is this creature that we can't even get our heads around, but we're going to try and take him into the boat. We want Jesus on our terms. But it doesn't work. It didn't work for the crowd. It didn't work for the disciples, because the very next moment, they run aground. They get where they're going, and Jesus is gone. And that, when we look at the way the people wanted to take Jesus on their terms, put him on a throne to finally solve the Rome problem. The way the disciples wanted to take him into the boat, to have Jesus here on our terms. That is the only aspect of this gospel I can think of that explains why it would be paired with this Bathsheba story from the Old Testament. Because if we look at that story, we see David, the greatest and most revered king in the history of Israel, who was entrusted with this authority and broke the line of succession in order to go from the family of Saul to the family of David, because here's a guy with integrity, right? But what happens? Like every monarch in history, he lets that power go to his head. He was chosen for this place. He was chosen to have power and to have authority, and somewhere in that human mind, it caused him to conclude, well, then I deserve things that are better than everyone else. I deserve to have what I want because I must have been chosen. It wasn't just the capriciousness of God. I was chosen for a reason. It was me for a reason. I don't know what that reason is, but it's got to be a reason. Therefore, I deserve nice things. And that's where David's head went. So he looks out his window. He sees a beautiful person named Bathsheba, and he takes her. And when that goes badly, and she's pregnant, and he wants to avoid a scandal, he goes out to the battlefield, not in person, but he goes to the battlefield and takes her husband Uriah, brings him home, and tries to get him to believe that the baby is his. And when that doesn't work, he takes Uriah again, puts him back out on the battlefield to be killed. And we have somebody here who is chosen to give of himself to the people as a servant king. And it turns out that all he can do is take. Now, David had the power to take Bathsheba. David had power, Bathsheba didn't. David had power, Uriah didn't. He could take them. But when we see the people trying to take Jesus on that hillside, or the disciples trying to take Jesus in on the sea, it doesn't work. Jesus refuses to be taken. He knew, just like David knew, his ancestor. David knew that he was chosen to fulfill the covenant promise to Abraham to be a blessing to the whole world. David failed, and where David failed, Jesus didn't. He had that opportunity early in his ministry with the temptation from Satan to take. Where Satan says, you were chosen for a reason. You are the anointed, the beloved, only begotten Son of God. You deserve all of these great things. And Jesus said, I am not here to take, I'm here to give. And he had to make that choice continually throughout his ministry. And that's echoed in the words of Paul that we read this morning too, which is one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, where he says, where is it? Oh, more pages here. Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than all we ask or imagine. And we hear about that power, and we welcome that into our lives. We embrace that God is working in us and through us, but we want it on our terms. Just like the people on the hillside wanted Jesus in their terms, and the disciples wanted Jesus on their terms. So we take on the name of Jesus so he can lend credibility to our cause or our platform. And we take on the sacraments of Jesus in such a way that we get to decide who gets what and when. And we take on the promises of Jesus, promises of healing and hope and salvation. But we take them on in order to decide who is in and who is out. We set the terms. We write the rules. We appropriate the funds. And we get it all on our terms. We take and we take and we take. And guess what? It's worked. Look at all of the stuff we have. Look at everything that we have achieved. Taking the power of Jesus on our terms. It's worked. We have achieved the imaginable under our own power. Just like David took Bathsheba. Just like David took Uriah. But not just like the people tried to take Jesus. When they did that, what did they end up with? Empty hands. If they took anything, it turns out it wasn't Jesus. And here we are with all of the things, all of the riches, all of the privileges, all the benefits of the religion that we've built. But where is Jesus? He's not here. Not with that mindset. It's like a decoy. Jesus puts something out there that we can take. But if we find that we can operate on our terms and that we can function according to our own agendas, whatever we have just taken is not Jesus. Jesus has left the building. And I don't want to reference The Chosen every single sermon. I try not to. And some of us are huge Chosen fans, so we laugh. But one of my favorite things about the relationship between the disciples and Jesus that it depicts in this series, The Chosen, is that they keep wanting him to be this thing that they have in their mind. And he keeps not being that. And the show keeps depicting, why don't you just trust him? And we look back 2,000 years later, and you're like, yeah, just do it. Just understand, he's got something else going on than you could even imagine. But we struggle with that too, don't we? We feel like we know what Jesus is doing here, and that it's up to us to make it happen. And I think Jesus, in his grace, has not left us entirely. But sometimes he's speaking to us from the wings, saying, almost. 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 You're taking, and I'm trying to teach you to give. You're doing things under your own power, on your own agenda, and I'm trying to teach you to take on my power and my agenda. And it's true that we have achieved some great things. We have achieved the imaginable. But I think Jesus is speaking from the wings, trying to get us to reach for the unimaginable. Amen.